Please join us for our gathering hymn, All Creatures of the Earth and Sky.
All creatures of the earth and sky, come, kindred, lift your voices high. Alleluia, alleluia, bright burning sun with golden beam, soft shining moon with silver gleam. Alleluia, 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 alleluia. Swift rushing wind so wild and strong, light clouds that sail in heaven along. Alleluia, alleluia, fair rising morn in praise rejoice. High stars of evening pride a voice. Alleluia, 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 alleluia. Cool flowing water, pure and clear, make music for all life to hear. Alleluia, alleluia, dance flame of fire so strong and bright, and bless us with your warmth and light. Alleluia, 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 alleluia. Embracing earth you day by day, bring forth your blessings on our way. Alleluia, alleluia, all herbs and fruits that richly grow, let them the glory also show. Alleluia, 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 All you of understanding heart, forgiving others, take your part. Alleluia, alleluia, let all things now the holy bless, and worship God in humbleness. Alleluia, 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 alleluia.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to all of you on this Easter Sunday. Welcome to this live stream worship service of First Unitarian Church, where our mission is to build the beloved community and to nurture the individual spirit. Whoever you are, wherever you are, we welcome you. In these last weeks, we have been blessed to have people in Asia, in Africa, in Europe, as well as from states across our own country join us for this Sunday worship. And so we gather mindful of our interconnectedness from many places. We gather mindful of the multiple generations gathered here. What a blessing that it is that we're here together on this Easter day. As we begin, words of Victoria Safford. The dead shall rise again. Have you seen the trees? Have you seen the maple buds, the magnolias swelling, poplars, the first lacy pale spray across the shoulder of the hills? Did you smell the rain last week and the muddy, ready earth receiving it? Did you smell the musty, lusty, moldy pile of leaves, and underneath the moist and living earthworms, wide awake? Is it safe, I wonder, to presume that we have all seen the dead resurrected? Can we presume just quietly among us this basic fact? Can we admit, however carefully at first, however foolish it may sound, that once or twice in our lives, or perhaps over and over and tumbling over, we have seen events miraculous? Did the sun come up this morning, no thanks to us and all of us? And did the earth awake again, or did it not? The dead shall rise again. We know because we've seen it. Despite all the concerns that weigh our spirits down, Easter invites us to hear the invitation and allow ourselves to rise. It is good that we are here together. Once again, welcome, everyone. Reverend Bill will light our chalice here on the chancel this morning. If you have a chancel with you at home, I invite you to light it now. We are Unitarian Universalists. We light this chalice in faith, in hope, and in love.
You are a brick tied to me that's dragging me down. Strike a match and I'll burn you to the ground. We are the jack-o'-lanterns in July, setting fire to the sky. Here comes this rising tide, so come on. Crosswalks and cross hearts and hope to die. Silver clouds with green lighting, so we can take the world back from the heart attack.
One maniac at a time, we will take it back.
You know time crawls on when you're waiting for the song to start. So dance along to the beat of your heart. Hey, young blood, doesn't it feel like our time is running out? I'm gonna change you like a remix, then I'll raise you like a phoenix wearing our vintage misery. No, I think it looked a little better on me. I'm gonna change you like a remix, then I'll raise you like a phoenix. Bring on the boys and scrap, metal the tanks, get hitched, make a career out of robbing banks, because the world is just a shell and we are wearing black masks. You throw God's spirits as the note we pass. We can take the world back from the heart attack.
One maniac at a time, we will take it back.
You know time crawls on when you're waiting for the song to start. So dance along to the beat of your heart. Hey, young blood, doesn't it feel like our time is running out? I'm gonna change you like a remix, then I'll raise you like a phoenix wearing our vintage misery. No, I think it looked a little better on me. I'm gonna change
Words of the Reverend Mark Bellatini. I could say that the Earth hanging in space is an accident in the universe that just happened. Or I could say it's one more miracle in a cosmos filled with miracles. But today, on Easter, I cannot tell which word is which. Accident, miracle. They seem to see each other's face in the mirror of my heart. And so I rise in gladness again on this Easter day. Everything grows beyond words, beyond earth and heaven, into a necessary vision of harmony and peace, calling all of us to rise into life that is alive. Let us allow our spirits to rise in gladness once again and join together now in worship. Let's join in singing Rising Green.
My pot doth rise in the roots of yon oak. Her sap does run in my veins. Boundless my soul like the open sky, where the stars forever have lain. Where the stars, where the stars, where the stars forever have lain. My hands hold the weavings of time without end. My sight as deep as the sea, giving my heart and measures of hope that outlast eternity. That of love, that outlasts eternity. I feel the tides as they answer the moon, rushing on a far distant sand. Winging my song is the wind of my breast, and my love blows over the land. And my love, and my love, and my love blows over the land. My foot carries days of the old into new. Our dreaming shows us the way. Wondrous our faith settles deep in thy earth, rising green to bring a new day. Rising green, rising green, rising green, rising green to bring a new day.
A reading by Judy Brown entitled The Trough. There is a trough in waves, a low spot where horizon disappears and only sky and water are our company. And there we lose our way unless we rest, knowing the wave will bring us to its crest again. There we may drown if we let fear hold us in its grip and shake us side to side and leave us flailing, torn, disoriented. But if we rest there, in the trough, in silence, being in the low part of the wave, keeping our energy and noticing the shape of things, the flow, then time alone will bring us to another place where we can see horizon see land again, regain our sense of where we are and where it is we need to swim. Let's join now in singing Spirit of Life, our doxology.
Spirit of life, come unto me. Sing in my heart all the stirrings of compassion. Blow with the wind, rise in the sea. Move in the hand, giving life the shape of justice. Roots wholly closed, wings set me free. Spirit of life, come to me, come to me.
Good morning, everybody. Happy Easter. I'm Cassandra, Director of Family Ministries, and this is Bodie. And we're going to listen to an Easter story this morning. It's called The Story of the Phoenix by Amy Friedman and Meredith Johnson. The children were hunting for Easter eggs when suddenly they felt a strong wind overhead. What was that? Annabelle asked, because everyone had felt the wind. It ruffled their hair and the grass, and for one moment it seemed so loud that they thought a plane had passed just above them. I don't know, Jack said, but then he spied another Easter egg and he raced to grab it first. Liza and Lonnie ran into the house, their faces wet with tears. The twins were very young, and they wanted their grandmother to explain this strange wind. Something swept out of the sky, they cried. Grandmother instantly knew. Come here, children, she said, gathering them toward her as if they were little ducklings. And even though the Easter eggs were out there hidden in the grass, and even though their baskets were full of chocolate, the children could not help but listen. That wind had felt so very strange. Grandmother looked up at the sky, squinting her eyes. She knew it was the phoenix bird that had passed overhead. She'd felt this coming, and she began her story. One day in the beginning of time, there was a bird with feathers of red and gold, as bright as the sun itself. And the sun adopted this bird as its own. What kind of bird would a sun have? Liza asked. A happy bird, Grandmother said, because the sun explained to the phoenix that they would live forever. Then Grandmother looked sad. But the poor bird was far too beautiful for this world. People were always trying to steal those magnificent feathers, and so the phoenix flew away, far, far east. That must have taken a long time, Annabelle said. She tried to imagine how much strength such a journey would take. Yes, a very long time, Grandmother agreed. But finally, the phoenix came to a hidden desert where no people lived. And there the bird lived in peace for 500 years. Oh my, it was terribly old then, Lonnie said. The bird had lost some strength, so no longer could fly as fast and far as when they were young, Grandmother continued. And then one day the phoenix decided they wished to be young again. And so they lifted up their head and begged the sun for youth. And the sun gave back their youth, Jack cried. Grandmother shook her head. No, the sun didn't answer. After a long while, the phoenix decided to return to the place they had lived in the beginning. And so the bird flew across the desert and over mountains and oceans. And here and there they had to rest because they were weak. And each time they landed, they collected scented bark and leaves, and the bird carried these in their feathers as they flew. At long last, the bird came to their old home and landed on a tall palm tree. And at the very top of that tree, the phoenix built a nest of cinnamon bark and lined it with leaves. And then the bird collected the scented gum that flows out of some trees, myrrh it is called, and they made an egg from the myrrh and carried that egg to the nest. And now the phoenix sat upon their nest, lifted their head and sang to the sun, begging for their youth. This time the sun heard, and it began to shine down upon that tree with all its strength. All the other creatures ran to hide from that terrible heat, but the phoenix stayed on their nest, letting the sun beat down. And suddenly it was so hot that flames leaped out of the nest, and the phoenix became only fire. After a while, the flame went away, and the phoenix was gone. In the nest lay only a heap of ashes. "The phoenix died," Annabelle cried. "But the sun promised they would live forever." Grandmother smiled. "Just listen." The ash began to tremble and shake, and all of a sudden, out from under that heap of ash came a young phoenix. The birds stretched their tiny neck and lifted their wings, and they grew and grew until they were as large as the old phoenix, and just as beautiful. And then that phoenix hollowed out the egg of myrrh and placed the ashes inside the egg and closed it up. Then the young phoenix sang their joy to the sun. And when the song was over, the wind blew and the clouds returned to the sky, and the other creatures crept out of their hiding places. The phoenix flew up and away, all the way to a city known as Heliopolis, a city the Egyptians built to honor the sun. There the phoenix placed the egg with ashes on the sun's altar, and once again the bird flew off to the hidden desert. The children shouted with joy. "Was that the phoenix that flew overhead?" Grandmother smiled. "Well, my dears, every 500 years, when the phoenix feels old and weak, they fly back to that same tree and build a nest. Once again, the bird burns to ashes, and a new bird awakes from the ashes every time." "That was the bird that flew above us," Annabelle cried, and the children looked up and smiled. They wished they had looked up more quickly when the bird flew over. "We were too busy with our chocolate and our Easter eggs," Liza said sadly. "From now on, we'll pay more attention to the world around us," Jack promised, and the other children nodded. And then they ran to hunt for the rest of those beautiful Easter eggs hidden in the grass. Thank you for listening to our Easter morning story. Now I'd like to show you something special that the learning community created this week. Since we haven't been able to get together for our classes, we've been trying new ways to connect. This week we all made a shared art piece together using a computer app. Each person colored a feather or added a word that is important to share this Easter. This is our phoenix. Together, may we rise.
It is a commitment and a privilege for us as a congregation to share our offerings with the larger community. For this month of April, we're sharing our plate with our community partner, Bienstar, that provides quality, low-income rental housing and programs for farm workers and their families. Farm workers are now and have always been the foundation of our food systems. In this health crisis, the conditions under which they and other essential service providers work and live put them at high risk. Many farm workers may also be undocumented, which places them at even more risks since they are being excluded from public systems of emergency support. You can give through the QR code on your screen. you can give through the Donate Now button on Boxcast. Thank you for your generosity.
Don't be discouraged. Joy comes in the morning. Know that God is nigh. Stand still and look up. God is going to show up. He is standing by. Don't be discouraged. Joy comes in the morning. Know that God is nigh. Stand still and look up. God is going to show up. He is standing by. There's healing for your sorrow, healing for your pain.
We make space as we gather each week to name the concerns of our community life. You can send a prayer request into prayer@firstunitarianportland.org. For pastoral support, send a message to ministry@firstunitarianportland.org. Hear now the concerns of our community this week. Member Paul Kidwell entered hospice care this past week. Paul has been living with dementia for some time and has declined steadily in recent weeks. Paul and his wife Chris ask for our prayers and messages of support. We hold them this day. Member Susan Cunningham asked for prayers for her sister Joni, who is recovering from a stroke earlier this month. Susan says that Joni is a strong and stubborn woman who will recover, and she thanks us for our blessings and for our prayers. Members Lynn and Warren Bacon asked for prayers for their brother-in-law, Ken Houghton, who was diagnosed with coronavirus this past week in California. Ken is 92 years old and has pneumonia, and so his condition is very serious. We hold Ken and his extended family in these days. Will you join me now in prayer? Spirit of life and of love, God known to us by many names and no name at all, be with us on this Easter day. Be with us in all that we bring, most of all our own need for rebirth, most of all our own need for resurrection. Sometimes, Spirit, it feels as if we have been traveling in the valley of the shadow of death. So much is lost, so many lives, so much that has been disrupted, our isolation, our fears amid so much uncertainty, our fears about what the future will hold. Help us, Spirit, on this Easter day to imagine possibility. Help us to pay attention for what we already know is around us, the beauty of these spring days, the beauties of ways that we are coming together, the hope that comes from those willing to serve something greater in this time. Help us to give thanks for so many blessings, even in these times of so much loss. Yes, help us, Spirit, to imagine possibility. Help us to bear witness to what might be emerging. Help us to imagine how we might live together in harmony with each other and with this good green earth. Help us to find hope. Help us, Spirit, on this Easter day and in the days to come, to rise. Amen. Let's take a few moments now and keep silence together. Let us sing together now, Ashes and Smoke. Our reading this morning comes from the Gospel of Mark. When the Sabbath was over, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome bought spices so that they might go and anoint Jesus' body. Very early on the first day of the week, just after sunrise, they were on their way to the tomb, and they asked each other, "Who will roll away the stone from the entrance of the tomb?" But when they looked up, they saw that the stone, which was very large, had been rolled away. As they entered the tomb, they saw a young man dressed in a white robe sitting on the right side, and they were alarmed. "Don't be alarmed," he said. "You are looking for Jesus the Nazarene who was crucified. He is risen. He is not here. See the place where they laid him."
Of
and he shall reign forever and ever. Hallelujah. Hallelujah. You know, I love the Messiah, but the theology and the gender message, the hierarchy, the patriarchy, they're problematic for so many of us from start to finish. King of kings and Lord of lords? Good Lord, as my grandmother used to say. I disagree with so much of it. And yet, didn't you find yourself singing along? No, be honest, at least under your breath. Didn't you find yourself wanting to stand or at least rise up a little bit in your chair? I think we want so badly to rise this Easter. I think our need to rise up has never been greater. I think we're tired. I think we're scared. I think we're lonely. I think we desperately need the promise of Easter to be true this year. But I have to tell you, this is a hard year to get to hallelujah. You need faith in these virus times. And faith is just not our strong suit, most of us. Oh, we do critique, we do analysis, we do grievance. Yes, we even do grievance. But faith, that's a real problem for us this Easter. You see, in a good year, when life seems predictable, even if we know it is not just, we can simply find joy in the rebirth of the earth. Did the sun come up this morning and did the earth awake again, or did it not? Victoria Safford asks. Did you see Cassandra's yard and the bright sunshine? Have you seen the blossoms on the trees? Most years, the rebirth in the earth might be enough. It is not the earth's failing that is challenging us. The earth has done its part again. Oh, concern for global warming is playing in the back of our minds, but this year the real challenge is a microscopic virus and our very human responses to it. It's the deaths and the fault lines of oppression that they are revealing. It's the fear and the lurking knowledge that things will never, ever be the same. Those are the things that make it hard to get to hallelujah this year. Good Lord. How can we get to hallelujah when it is so clear that we are in such a mess? A clergy friend grieving his father's death, unable to travel thanks to the virus, and not even able, he's of Jewish background, not even able to sit Shiva in his father's memory, my friend found the words of C.S. Lewis, written in England in 1939 in a sermon entitled Learning in Wartime. Lewis wrote, I think it is important to try to see the present calamity in perspective. The war creates no absolutely new situation. It simply aggravates the permanent human situation so that we can no longer ignore it. Human life has always been lived on the edge of the precipice. War and pandemics simply aggravate that permanent human situation. Lewis goes on, we are mistaken when we compare war with normal life. Life has never been normal. Even those periods when we think most tranquil turn out on closer inspection to be full of cries, alarms, emergencies. Life has never been normal. The virus is just shining a light on truths many of us have been able to choose not to see. African Americans 3 times as likely or more to die because of deeply rooted historical inequalities in health care and housing and income, inequalities that we have at least not changed, inequalities that are part of what we knew as normal. Hourly workers have become magically essential workers thanks to the virus, so they can travel to work in crowded buses and metros where they stock the shelves and run the cash registers, clean the handles of the shopping carts, and deliver our bags of groceries, encountering hundreds of people a day with all the risks that entails, while some of us complain of too many Zoom meetings and our isolation. I say this not to call up guilt for those of us who are privileged. Truly, that is not my intention. But to ask, to beg for awareness. Our ministry this Easter has to be a call to awareness first, a call to be present to these truths and to remember them. A significant part of the justice work of this congregation, not only in these virus times, but for almost 3 decades, has been about maintaining awareness of the cries of suffering that many of us could so easily choose not to hear. Theologian Howard Thurman writes, "There is no need to fear evil, but there is every need to understand what it does and how it operates in the world. We must not shrink from the knowledge of the evilness of evil." The evilness of evil. Our world has gotten quieter outside. Fewer people on the streets, many fewer cars, fewer planes overhead. The normal hum has given way to quiet. And just perhaps that will help us hear the voices of those who suffer most. Because it feels like a Good Friday world right now. We are walking in the valley of the shadow, as Tom said. We tally the deaths every day. What a difficult Easter season, and what a difficult Easter sermon this is to preach, because we have to deal with the deaths before we can find new life, before we can even think about rising. Perhaps it may help to remember that we humans are always needing to figure out what it means to live in the presence of death. The story of the phoenix is not just a charming tale of rebirth. The phoenix lives for 500 years, and it's only at its great age when it offers itself to the flames to be reduced to ashes and smoke so that new life can rise up. But the story of the phoenix is about the truth of death every bit as much as it is about the miracle of rebirth. I think we need so badly to rise this Easter. The women who went to the tomb on Easter morning, they needed to rise too. They were mourning the death of their beloved teacher who had given them hope that the way things were was not the way that things had to be. They were brokenhearted, but they were doing what needed to be done. So they rose early and bought fragrant herbs and oil to anoint their friend's body, so that his friends could gather around, could sit Shiva to say goodbye. They came expecting to deal with death as their culture instructed them. It was woman's work that needed to be done. And they found the tomb empty and a stranger sitting there who tells them that Jesus is not there. He is risen. Those women, the Magdalene and the others, ready to do the work of preparation, so much in need of rising themselves, find an empty tomb. Nothing about this is normal. He is risen, the stranger tells them. Howard Thurman calls Easter the glad surprise. There is something compelling, he writes, about the glad surprise of Easter. The emphasis upon glad, it carries with it the element of elation, life, of something over and beyond the surprise itself. This has to do with the very foundation of hope. It is as if a person stumbling in the darkness, having lost their way, finds that the spot at which they have fallen is the foot of a stairway that leads from darkness to light. Such is the glad surprise. Or as Dr. King said, take the first step in faith. You don't have to see the whole staircase. Just take the first step. Just take the first step. Perhaps for us in this season of the virus, the first step is simply to be present to the suffering, to approach it, bringing our knowledge as religious people of all that needs to be done, just like the women in the gospel, to tell the story of the lives, the stories of those who die, but also the stories of the helpers who care for them, and the stories of the reason for the deaths too, not just the virus, but the human decisions, both the good decisions and the bad ones, in plain language so that we do not avoid the plain truth, even if that plain truth is that so many of these deaths did not need to take place. There is a lot to grieve, but grieving together can become an act of revolutionary love. And we know how to do that. It's one of the things we do so well in this church, in this religious community. That's why it may be unusual to speak of death on Easter morning, but it is not inappropriate this year, because being present to death and grief is part of our religious job. As we grieve, some righteous anger will emerge. I am sure of that. I feel it in myself. But our first and most important calling is to grieve and to know all that has been lost, and to discover that grief can become our first step. That grief is where our rising has to begin. Like the stories of that other rising, we will rise from that focus on death into new life. Now, there are many things that can keep us from rising, many things that can keep us stuck. A yearning for normal, for a return to what was when we know how flawed it was, that can keep us from rising. Weariness, yes, it is hard to rise when you're worn down and worn out. Making a god of ourselves or our self-interest, narcissism, self-centeredness, greed, all those can weigh you down too. There are so many things that can keep us from rising. But I think there is only one thing, really only one essential thing we need in order to rise. Let's say you find yourself at the foot of that staircase, by intention or by chance. What lets you hear the call to take that first step, even when you cannot see the top? I believe that what we need most is compassion. Compassion. That's the critical thing lacking in that old normal. It isn't lack of analysis. We've analyzed racism and inequality. We've analyzed pollution and our carbon footprints. We're using our pronouns and we're paying attention to accessibility. We've got our analysis down pat. But without compassion. And the problem is that the old normal the old normal does not seem to care. It's not that the old normal doesn't or can't understand. It's that the old normal doesn't care, at least not in the same way. The suffering that the old normal causes, it just doesn't seem to matter that much as the old normal makes its decisions. The problem, I think, is that the old normal places such a small value on compassion. Compassion is what allows us to rise, compassion for ourselves and compassion for others. That impulse to go outside at 7 p.m. and applaud the first responders and those essential workers and the nurses and the doctors. That landlord who decided he would not collect the April rent from his 200 apartments. He could afford not to, and he decided not to, just so the families who relied on his building for shelter would not be in jeopardy. So no rent for April. It is the individuals, some of them are celebrities, but a lot of them are not, who are buying food for all the shoppers in the store and delivering meals to all the kids who can't eat now at school. It's compassion. It's feeling with. It's caring about. It's being connected to. Finding meaning in what we can give and not just in what we can get. Compassion. That is where our hope lies this Easter. Jesus said to love one another. Yes. Feel with one another. Feel for one another. Care. Empathize. Give preventing suffering a heavy weight in your own equations. Take that first step and discover that staircase. These individual acts of compassion point toward the qualities of justice, equity, and compassion that we must begin to build into the world that will follow this crisis. Because there will be a world that follows it. And I believe we are being called to redeem that world with hearts and minds broken open by the death and the disruption. I believe that we are being called to move rapidly toward that beloved community, called to take this time as an opportunity as much as a problem. The alternative is to see our world devolve into self-protection and racism and xenophobia. And a decision is going to be made. A course is going to be charted, one way or the other. I don't think there is a middle ground. And I believe, as much as I believe anything, that the world can only be redeemed by love, by connection, and by compassion. Cameron Esposito writes, I am a seeker. We are all seekers, still hunting down answers to the questions of why we are here and what we are supposed to do. But for now, I can tell you this: connection. Connection to ourselves and connection to others. Maybe that connection is God. And we are our own saviors, meant to save ourselves and one another, meant by our choices to rise. This Easter does not offer a painless resurrection. Resurrection is actually never easy. Ask the phoenix while the flames are burning. But resurrection is possible, and hope is not an unreasonable emotion, because we can choose to rise, to take that first step, to lift our vision and shift our direction toward compassion and toward hope. And like the women leaving that tomb long ago, we know that the only choice possible for us is simply to begin. On this Easter morning, let us begin. Let us allow ourselves to rise. Will you join me now in prayer? Spirit of life that calls us to presence. Spirit of love that calls us to connection. God of Easter, of both suffering and rising. God of spring, that proof that rebirth is real. Help us stay connected, even while we must remain physically distant. Let our hearts do the touching, while our hands must stay at our sides. Help us find ways to support one another and those who suffer most. And let our spirits discover, once again, clarity and strength. Help us on this bright Easter morning to begin rising toward justice and equity, rising with compassion. Help us begin again. Help us allow ourselves to rise. May that be so, and amen. Let's sing together. The tide is rising. On this Easter morning, let us be reminded by the earth of the truth of spring and the hope we can find as the tide begins to move us up out of the trough toward the sun, allowing us to rise. And we discover that our passion for the beloved community, visible now on the horizon, is undimmed and confident of which direction we need to swim. We begin. This is the day we have been given. Let us rejoice in it and be glad. Go in peace, practice love. Happy Easter, and amen.